Well, hello and welcome to the army of Gymodisms, acronym and word guide, so that the new and old players can understand the basic lingo a little bit in From the Depth games. There is a lot of different words and acronyms that are being thrown around in this community, and it's very useful to know what they mean so you understand what other people are talking about. Feel free to copy the word list in the description, come back to this video whenever you are wondering something, ask what other stuff means in the comment that I might have missed, and of course, add things in the comments too. I put this little list together from words that I know, and I also asked some of you in the Discord for some extra words in case I had forgotten some, and I had. So, feel free to join the Discord as well, of course, and welcome to the Gymodism Empire. The bow of ships is the front of the ship. It is a offboard location. That means it is outside of the ship, when we're referring to as the bow. The fore of the ship. The fore of the ship is the front part of the ship, or the front, but it's an onboard location. So it's on the ship. So this is the bow of the ship, and these missile interceptors are located on the fore of the ship. So you know the difference. The stern. The stern of the ship is the back of the ship. This is also an offboard location, so it is more specifically the back part outside of the ship. Aft. The aft is the back portion of the ship, the rear of the ship, but it's on board. So that means this is our aft deck gun. Large naval and aerial vessels also use lights to indicate a direction. The aft of the ship is usually indicated with a white light. Port. When standing on the ship and looking towards the bow, the port is the left side of the ship. It's usually indicated with a red light. Starboard. So again, if one stands on the ship and look towards the bow, the starboard is the right side of the ship. It's usually indicated with a green light. It is called starboard because before rudders, the steering oar were located to the right of the ship, in its direction of travel. Port and starboard both indicates the outside of the ships to the left and right sides, but also the left side of the ship and the right side of the ship if you are dividing it in the middle, from bow to stern. Deck. The deck or decks of a ship is not only the main deck, but any and all decks located on the ship. And naturally, per definition, an onboard location. Now let's get started with some acronyms. There is quite a couple of acronyms on A, so let's start with AC. AC stands for armor class. All blocks have an intricate armor class. Wood has 8, metal has 40, rubber has 6. A higher armor class protects the block from different kinds of damages. So for example, kinetic and explosive. If the armor class is high, the block can actually take less damage. While each block has an armor class, a surface can have a higher armor class, because the main building block's armor class is actually stacking to an extent, as can be seen with the max structural armor boost thing, which is 1.6 for wood and 12 for heavy armor. So while the armor for metal is 40, the armor class of this surface is 48. Some systems, like the ring shield, can boost the armor class of this surface even further. Please refer to my armor tutorial and my ring shield tutorial for more information on that. But the list goes on, so we have to move on. AP. AP is directly proportional to AC, armor class. AP stands for armor piercing value. If the armor piercing value, as can be seen here, is higher than the armor class of the surface that is being hit, the surface will take full damage. If the surface armor class is higher than the AP value of the damage type, then it will get reduced damage proportionally to how much higher the armor class of the surface is higher than the AP value of the damage type. AC and AP causes a lot of misconceptions, so I will be a little extra clear when it comes to AC and AP. You do not need to have an armor piercing value that is higher than the armor class of the target that you're shooting at in order to deal damage to it. It will, however, be proportionally smaller. So, if we're shooting this thumb shell at metal with an armor class of 40 and we have an AP value of 8, we are not going to deal a lot of damage and it's going to be a waste of materials. What is optimal is to make sure that we have an armor piercing value that's close to the armor class, but not quite there. Like that. If we have an AP value that is higher than the AC value we are shooting at, we are effectively wasting damage and kinetic energy. AI. Get ready for some creepiness. AI stands for Artificial Intelligence and refers to the AI mainframes and connected blocks, as well as detection you'll find here in the AI menu. However, it's a lie. It is not artificial intelligence. The AI mainframe is actually just a brain in a box. That's why I find it well-mannered to actually name my AIs, or brains in boxes. AMM stands for anti-missile missiles. They are also referred to as interceptors, or just INTs. AMMs and interceptors are available as small or medium missiles. They consist of a missile interceptor in the front. They added a text here because people used to add frags and explosive to the interceptors to make them deal more damage. I did that before too. And it turns out it doesn't help at all. When building these, you want to make them as small as possible. Only have a missile interceptor as payload, otherwise it will just be worse. Okay, back to the video, Jimodism. It's Eric of Jimodism now. AMMs are set to target only missiles. Interceptors can target crams and missiles, of course. They can be set up with fins, or instead turning thrusters for faster movability. APN guidance is recommended, but of course not required. APS stands for Advanced Projectile System, also known as Advanced Cannons. Advanced Cannons are pretty realistic-ish and is a very big system that's very complex and has a lot of versatility. Also, the only weapon World War nerds are using together with these guys. With APS, we can make cannons from 18 to 500 millimeters. And it's this shell editor that belongs to the APS system, where we have our modular shell that we're building. They are fired using gunpowder or railgun sorcery and unholy amounts of electricity. AP-chem usually refers to a specific family of APS rounds, where the nose of the shell is usually armor-piercing head and sometimes sabot, solid warheads to taste, or sabot warheads, and then a chemical payload. The chemical payload can be a mix or any of the chemical variants, which is high explosive, frag, incendiary, EMP, and of course technically secondary shaped charge, but that has a better name. This shell penetrates the target and then explodes whenever it can't penetrate any deeper. Does not require any fuse. While the category is called AP-chem, the shell itself is usually named after what it contains. In this example, we have AP-HE. Azipod. An Azipod is thus a water propeller with azimuth movement ability. And it can do this because we have placed it on a spinblock and we set up controls to do this. In real life, they're usually only in the back of ships, but in From the Depth is super nice to have them both in the back and the front. This gives us some very good movability and maneuverability. And turning rate, very nice. ACBs. ACBs is the simplest form of automation. You will go into them on the Q menu and you can choose a trigger. Then you can select a action. So you can basically make shields turn on and off automatically if there are enemies nearby, or turning on steam boilers, or whatever you want. ACBs are super useful for automating simple tasks. Bread. Something you can eat. Or maybe not. Bread is short for breadboard. Breadboard is basically a programmable thing, which I haven't quite learned yet, but when you are watching this video, perhaps I have bothered to learn it yet, and there is a video about it. Anyways, breadboard is in case you don't hate yourself and want to spam your ship with 1000 ACBs to control all the cool things. This is an excellent microcomputer that you can automate every task and do a lot of other cool stuff and control weapons and whatnot. Some people even use breadboard instead of the AI's movement routines. If you're gonna play this game for a long time, you will learn breadboard sooner or later. Now I haven't done that, but I will still recommend you to learn this sooner rather than later, because I feel like I would have been much better off learning breadboard instead of struggling with my darn ACBs. The automated control blocks can be good for simple tasks, but let's just say breadboard is a much better solution, and all excuses to not learn it is just excuses. CC stands for Custom Campaign. That is a player-made campaign with other vehicles, other factions, and other maps. A great way to entertain yourself when you have played the Nether and the Ashes of the Empire and maybe even the Glow campaign. Anyways, if you're watching this video far in the future, it is very likely that we already have a custom campaign with the army of Jimodism involved. But that's for the future viewers. Current timeline viewers, of course, you all know that we are not quite done with making all the different ships and vessels, so that will be a while, I think. CJEs stands for Custom Jet Engines. Inside the R menu, we have Custom Jet Parts. So they're called custom jets. Custom jet engines. Here we can piece together a engine, and it can produce thrust, it can produce engine power, it can produce electrical power. Power per material, it's one of the most effective engines in the game. They are extremely handy for basically making anything fly. CIWS stands for Close-in Weapon Systems. It's technically any weapon that is controlled by a close-in weapon system controller. Like this. It makes it target shells and missiles instead of the enemy. CIWS are usually APS, but can be simple weapons, cram cannons, missiles, laser turrets, plasma cannons as well. Charge lasers and charge plasma systems. When a weapon has a lot of stored potential damage, but has an extremely slow refill rate, it usually gets the prefix of charge. This charge laser has a lot of energy stored in these cavities, but it has so little pumps it takes forever to fill this thing up. Thus it has a very low power usage, but can deal a lot of damage. When the stored damage is out, well, then it basically reloads so slowly that it doesn't matter anymore. The weapon is basically considered single use. As with a charge plasma system. Here we have a lot of chambers with stored plasma charges, but we have so few generators. So we can deal a lot of damage, but when these charges are out, well, we don't have anything left. It's usually used with a little bit of a more charger per like that, and now we wasted all the damage, and there we are. Charge lasers and charge plasmas are built to only be used once per battle, but you can get a lot of damage to the table for a lower cost, which is absolutely vital for alpha strike weapons. Which is not in the list, I realize, but it's basically a MechWarrior term of dealing as much damage as possible in the shortest amount of time, basically shooting everything in the same instant. Chemical/chem usually refers to APS rounds, and it's, of course, as mentioned before, explosive, incendiary, fragmental, or EMP types of damage. Basically, not kinetic. This is a pure chemical shell. Before we looked a little bit at AP-chem. When it comes to chemical shells, they deal the same damage, no matter how fast or slow they are. When we're talking about pure chem shells from APS, well, they are usually a lot slower than armor-piercing or kinetic types of shells. And that's of course because the damage is just as much if they are slow as if they are fast. Now something weird happened, and that means extra entry. In Designer, you can click the C menu to get AI control. Here you find God Mode. God Mode is a toggle button that lets you not take any damage while in Designer. And now with God Mode off. Cheese. Also something you eat. Well, it's more like hacks, but... Cheese or cheese tactics is basically a set of hacks that can be used in the game that is not like hacking the game, but is by most people considered unfair/boring. So it depends a little bit on person to person what is considered cheese tactics. So watch out for rules and tournaments and stuff like that. But generally, it's about breaking the game in some way or bypassing some built-in law or rule in the game to make things work in an unfair way. Basically everything that is trying to bypass the rules in the game and the game mechanics that are trying to make the game fair and balanced. If you're trying to break that in an intentional way, you're probably using a cheese tactic. But again, it's extremely individual what people consider cheese tactics. Some people consider charge plasma and charge lasers to be cheese tactics. I don't. And here's an example of something I think is a cheese tactic that some don't think is a cheese tactic. So here we have a jet engine, and placement is blocking the thrust, so it only has 20%. However, we only need to give it 8 blocks free behind it, and then we can basically seal this thruster up, and it will give thrust just as normal and being hidden inside of here. In my book, it stops being cheese tactic if you do like this. Have a duct instead. Then it has free space here, it is protected, but we cannot make this free space in between be shared with a turret or something like that. Now this space is dedicated and nothing else can be placed behind it. So, as you might imagine, make sure your tournament organizers, like me, makes the rules clear on what is cheese tactics or not, so you don't get disqualified or something like that. Now, what basically everyone agrees is a cheese tactic is spin clipping. Here we have 2 big material containers, and of course these containers can't share the same space, but since they are placed on different spin blocks, the game can't really check that they are colliding with each other, so they're basically sitting inside each other and glitching here a little bit. So as you can imagine, using this cheese tactic, we can basically make weapons, engine, armor, anything infinitely dense. And that is trying to circumvent one of the game mechanics and thus is considered a cheese tactic. Hope you understand. Cram. The Elder Custom Cannon System. Firing ridiculously large shells. The name comes from that the cram shell, starting from 1000 millimeters going up to 2000 millimeters, real battleship guns here, They are in anyways having these pellets, and these pellets are being crammed into the shell. The cram shell is basically like a big empty bucket, and all these pellets are getting crammed into that bucket, making the shell, using payload packers. When the pellets have filled the cram shell, we can fire this ridiculously large projectile and deal a lot of damage. Dakka. Borrowed from Warhammer 40k's orcs, the Dakka basically translates to somewhere firepower and weapon amount in combination. Dakka is originally a onomatopoetic sound imitating the sound of heavy machine gun and cannon fire. But in From the Depth, the definition is a little bit more loose and refers to basically more firepower and more weapons, preferably in combination. And if you have any troubles with your ship, adding more Dakka is always the right answer. Doom crams. A very large cram cannon that usually costs at least 100,000 and has the damage potential of critting the enemy ship in one shot or one volley. That boy, for example, costs 400,000. Very scary. Dumb. How you feel when you see the consequences of putting your ammo beside your AI. No, actually, it's just any missile that has no guidance system. Basically like early types of missiles, just going straight forward with a rocket engine smashing into the target. Usually has to be pretty quick and accurate and usually misses a lot. DIF, or direct input fed guns. A type of APS gun that has no outloaders and it has no ammo storages or anything like that. It only has ammunition inputs. And these are placed, the ammo intakes are placed directly on the firing piece, which is possible but gives an extremely slow reload speed. Thus, we can have 1, 2, 3, and 4 of these per firing piece, and we also can have one stored inside the chamber. So we have a total of 5 shots possible for a diff gun before we are relying on the ammo intake's reload speed, which is extremely slow. This one reloads every 600 seconds, for example, so you can only count on it shooting how many ammo intakes it has plus 1, then it's kind of over. So not a single-use weapon, but a few times use weapon. EED, or defuse, which refers to the emergency ejection defuse. EEDs help mitigate the damage from ammo racking. Ammo racking is when a autoloader from the APS system gets damaged and contains a lot of scary stuff, like frags, for example. Then the whole thing blows up and it does a lot of damage. What we can do then is to add ammo ejectors on all of the autoloaders. In case an autoloader gets damaged, the shells will just be ejected instead of blowing up inside the turret, which can cause other types of trouble. The only thing we can do to fix that, after adding the ammo ejectors on all of the autoloaders, we'll need to go into the shell and select, you guessed it, the EED, Emergency Ejection Defuse. So when the shell is ejected, it's basically defused. However, to save game data and whatever, when an autoloader with an ejector that has emergency ejection defuses are ejected, they are not actually rendered. You will not see them in the game because they wouldn't be able to harm your ship anyways. So they save that generation, giving us a nice result of no chain reactions. For comparison, if we remove the fuse, it looks like this. EMP stands for electromagnetic pulse. It's a damage type in From the Depth that creates a surge that snakes through the target and finds susceptible blocks. While it is not able to deal damage to most blocks, it is very able to deal a lot of damage against really important blocks, like AI blocks, weapon controllers, laser pumps, and more. While it's not looking like much damage was dealt, this thing is actually already dead. The EMP surges has searched out the AI and removed it. Blocks that are susceptible to EMP will say so in the menu, EMP susceptibility. Surge protectors is the only EMP susceptible block you really want EMP to hit. The only thing you can do to defend yourself against EMP is to protect your susceptible components using rubber as insulation. You also want to place some surge protectors here and there for the EMP to seek out instead. If you don't do this, you will be guaranteed EMP fried. But don't worry, we have an EMP tutorial, of course. We have several. ERA is explosive reactive armor. ERA will be destroyed when it's being shot at, but it can instantly stop a heat, an AP-chem, or a HESH when it is hit, thus making that particular shell doing no further damage. Nobody knows why the full ERA block even exists, because the half ERA block costs half as much, while doing the exact same thing. I mean, it's gonna blow up when it's being shot at, and it really does its job, so why bother with a full block? Like this. Let's compare. Very many fragments. Very scary. Frag. What you just saw. Also available for missiles and crams. Fins usually refers to an APS components called stabilizer fin body. These cute little fins help your shell hit the target more often, while making them slower. Fins are most commonly used in APS systems that are kinetic only and are made to hit incoming missiles and crams. So, a CIWS cannon that you know by now. And since you asked, I'm gonna tell you the most effective shell you can use for kinetic APS CIWS. They are best used with a lot of components, 20 components, having 2 stabilizer fin bodies and 1 heavy head. That's it. They should be mounted in guns that are about 100 millimeters. Thank me later. Or not. Can of course also refer to fins inside missiles and torpedoes. Fins help steer the missile towards the target and makes them more stable while flying. And that's a nice segue into GP, rail and rail assist. GP stands for gunpowder in APS. GP means gunpowder casing. To contrast that, we have rail. We've been shooting railgun shots all day. Rail can use railgun casings if you really need that extra rail charge, but usually it's useless and you should just have kinetic rods firing from railguns. But whatever, if you want to have extra rail draw, you'll need to add some railgun casings. You don't have to. If you combine this two, basically firing this gunpowder based shell from a railgun, adding extra rail draw, well, then you can get this shell to have an expected muzzle velocity of like 2074 meters per second. If you combine them, it's called rail assist. So only railgun, you can see we can only reach 1686 meters per second. And with a lot of gunpowder as well, we can crank this up and get a higher speed. That's how it usually works. And having both is rail assist. Rail assisted gunpowder is just assumed. Disambiguation, or whatever Wikipedia says. GP can also stand for General Processing Power. To not be confused, I call General Processing Power for GPP, but some people may also call it GP, even though GP stands for gunpowder. Let's just settle that, okay? Your general processing power is basically how strong/fast your AI can think. And having more general processing power is required to have good detection and remote controlled missiles. They can be increased by adding GPP cards onto the AI. On a detection component on a craft, you can see how much GP GPP is needed and how much you have. If you have too little, your GPP-based system efficiency will be below 100, which is not optimal. If you're using the remote guidance component on your missile, you will see how much general processing power is used per missile. Make sure you have room for that when you're firing your missiles, because they will only be used when the missiles are fired. And if you have too little, they will have a hard time hitting the enemy with remote guidance, because the detection system won't really see your enemy very properly. So let's be smart, everyone. Aha. HA, of course, stands for heavy armor. It is the strongest armor in the game, and it is as heavy as lead. It's not funny anymore, Jimodism. Thanks, I'm Eric, though. HE stands for high explosive, which is, of course, a CRAM, APS, PAC even, and missile damage type. Also kind of happens if you accidentally blow up a couple of ammo boxes or something like that. HEAT is an acronym for High Explosive Anti-Tank, also known as Shaped Charge. Heat shells are some weird shit. It basically shapes a charge, melts copper and injects that into the enemy target, creating havoc on the other side of the armor. See this thick armor that provides perfect protection against a 500mm frag shell? Well, unfortunately, the fragments are spawned on the inside and it's able to deal some pretty deep damage anyways. Cool stuff. Shaped charges, or heat, is also available for missiles using the shaped charge head and adding some high explosives behind it, just like the APS. The false idol of high explosive squash heads. Squash heads are made by simply taking our shaped charge heat head and replacing that with a squash head. What it basically does is that this thing flattens itself on the armor and spawns a lot of explosions there. And somehow it sends some weird shockwaves through all of these meters of armor and forces the armor to spawn really scary fragments on the other side. Before, it has been touted as one of the scariest shells in the entire game. I don't quite think it's true, but it can be really scary and you should really have an air gap in case somebody brings these to the table. Correction. These red spalls are not called fragments, they are spalls. They are called spalls because they come from this armor piece. They are not part of the shell's function. A heat shell brings its own fragments, thus those fragments are not spalls. But since the squash head produces the fragments from the inside of the target armor, they are called spalls. So now you know that, if you care. That's also the reason why the layer behind of it can be called a spall liner. Oh my god, this is so outside this tutorial. But we just added a spall liner, which will make the fragments less scary now. So now you know that. That's a spall liner. Also does nothing against the heat, but now you know. HP refers to hull point. So hull point is a tip on projectiles. They are available for CRAM and APS. In APS, the damage is directly proportional to the speed of the shell. In CRAM, it is not proportional to the speed of the shell. It is doing the same damage every time, dependent on how many packers there are. Hull point tips converts the damage type to impact. Thus, it is completely stopped by an air gap, but takes out big chunks of armor wherever they hit. It also cares nothing about you having angled armor. Kinetic refers to all types of weapons that deal ranged kinetic damage. And kinetics are of course dealing kinetic damage only. So all sorts of purely penetrating shells like the Arquebalista Invictus, if you've seen that. This shell is of course a kinetic one. We can make this missile not have any payload but just have reinforced bodies and a thumper head, and it will now do kinetic damage instead and be a kinetic missile. You can of course make your crams be kinetic weapons too, by not having payload and having only hardener pellets and probably a hollow point head. Particle cannons are usually kinetic weapons too. More about them later. LAMs, laser anti-munition systems. While CIWS lasers is absolutely not a bad idea, you can make your life very easy by using LAMS nodes instead. The LAMS nodes is a dome that will shoot any target that it sees that is a shell or whatever that is in its vicinity. And here you have different settings, and LAMS is the only way that you can shoot down incoming APS shells. You can set them to target missiles only if you want to. You can set them to target shells only, then they will target crams and APS. They suck underwater and is best used at closer ranger. Somewhere between 200-ish meters seems to be working pretty well. To make your LAMs be able to detect incoming shells, you'll need a couple of munition warning systems, at least one in each direction, to be able to detect incoming APS shells, because they're pretty quick, you know. LAMs are very easy and cheap to work with because they don't require complex setups with turrets and CIWS controllers. Lua. If you love programming, well, this game has you covered. Lua is a programming language and they can be added to your missile systems. If you add them to a launch pad, you can then add a Lua component here, and you can then basically program exactly how you want this missile to fly. Don't even ask, I never made a Lua missile, they have only been used against me. LVC, or LWC. LVC stands for Local Weapon Controller. It's of course the thing that control your weapons. Very handy. Without them you can't have any turrets or weapons be automatic. They have some cool rules you should not forget about, like altitude bracket, in case you're not making all your crams be underwater machines or whatever. Anyways, look them through. This all-in-one component has a failsafe attached. If you use this component, you'll need to attach the failsafe manually, as well as the receiver, like the other AI components. But it's a good bit cheaper. MDs or MDBs. Some people even call them AMEs. That's basically a munition defense head and a couple of munition defense bodies like this. This is the other shell you can use for your CIWS. If they're not kinetic CIWS, they're gonna be this type of CIWS. DMDBs or MD CIWS, they are basically creating a big explosion in the air. They were previously known as FLAK. I also say FLAK many times, but it's basically a very wide explosion that does minuscule damage towards armor, but does a lot of damage towards projectiles. They're very popular for use with diff guns, diff CIWS with this type of warhead. You can see when they go close to explosion, it's a big explosion, and that can kill Doomcram shells, for example, with a couple of them. Pretty nice. Munition defense diff CIWS is definitely the most cheap way you can protect yourself against huge missiles and Doomcrams. Just so you know. I don't know why some people call these warheads AME, but that stands for anti-munition explosive, if you were wondering. And if people say FLAK, they mean MDs. MATs. Short for materials that is being stored in material containers. If you wanna spawn anything, for example, it says how many mats it costs, and tournaments have a mats limit for how expensive your thing can be. You know, pretty easy. Some people say mats though, so smart to include, I thought. And of course, mats per second, mats per firepower, and mats per volume, and mats per something is of course different stats we use to guess how efficient the system is, how much it costs to keep running, and stuff like that. PACs. Particle cannons. PAC is this strange hit scan weapon that deals instant damage towards a target. It costs a lot of electricity / battery power, or energy stored in batteries to use. You can, however, customize them a lot. They do impact damage and piercing if you want kinetics, and we have EMP and even explosive damage applied to the target. They are really bad, but there is no defense. You can protect yourself from these. They're basically melting through whatever. It doesn't matter if you have shields, and it doesn't matter if you are evasive. A pack can get you, but their damage, if we compare that to how much materials or in effect energy they are using, well, then they are not really worth it. So you shouldn't be too scared about them. Also, they sound pretty cool. PIDs, short for Proportional Integral Derivate Controller. Yeah. Anyways, inside your AI menus here, you will see PIDs, Edit Pitch Controller, for example, and it's basically a fancy name to make your ship or flying thing or whatever move a little bit smooth and not just move around and be completely uncontrollable and shaky and snaky. Basically uses math stuff to move in smooth curves instead of shaky motion. Under control, you also have general purpose PIDs. These are not integrated into the AI and works despite the AI. Some of you asked before how to make a ship move smoothly inside the air or the water or submarine while still being able to be player controlled. Well, the thing you need is general purpose PIDs, and I have a tutorial on how to make smooth controlled manual control in the instant tutorials, so the person that asked for that obviously missed that one. And general purpose PIDs can be used together with the AI built-in PIDs. The general purpose will just override the AI ones. That's the only thing that will happen. Pen depth. That refers to a penetration depth fuse that is available for cram cannons and APS shells as well. So if we, for example, have a armor piercing head, a penetration depth fuse can be wherever, set to 7 meters, and 1 high explosive body. There is still a fuse. Then we can make this shell basically explode where we hope it will explode, which is apparently here right now. The pen depth fuse is basically required for cram cannons, but is usually not needed for APS cannons unless you're over penetrating, which you shouldn't be doing because that's wasted materials, as you probably know from the earlier section about AC versus AP. The beautiful prefabs. Prefabs is a fantastic menu in-game where you can basically save your own things by loading your prefabs, saving them, and spawning them wherever you want. Super handy little tool for capturing structures and saving them down if they are decorative or if they are basically functional. Some in-game prefabs are also spread out throughout the game. You can see here we have the turret templates. These are technically prefabs and different stuff all over the place. Prefabs. And since you want to be a pro gamer, you should know that ctrl+p is the shortcut for getting to prefab mode. And you should absolutely bind that to one of your mouse keys on your mouse. I would definitely do. More weird acronyms, yay! So here we have SAP, SAPHE, or SAPHE and whatever. And that stands for semi-armor piercing. high explosive heat, or whatever you have for type of payload. Here we have a semi-armor penetrating shell with high explosive. You can see it uses a heavy head. It could use an armor piercing head as well. Depends on, you know, the properties. For this big size, the heavy head works perfectly fine. And it is semi-armor penetrating. As you can see here, it just penetrated a little bit because it doesn't have that deep of a penetration power. However, it has a lot of damage in terms of chemical damage. So it can be a good trade-off to have SAPHE heat shells to be able to pack more payload while not penetrating as deeply. So SAPHE HE, and the other ones are of course different payloads. So yeah. SM, MM, LM, HM, should you be worried? It is absolutely fine. It just refers to small missiles, medium missiles, large missiles, and huge missiles, commonly used even inside the menu when you're trying to build cluster missiles. So, good to know. SAPHE refers to the SAPHE head and of course also the SAPHE warheads, which you can add to your APS shells. SAPHE, when we are talking about that, we often assume a SAPHE head. However, you can use SAPHE warhead bodies with another tip to increase the armor penetration value too, so that's also a combo. But SAPHE shells are usually SAPHE head and can have some SAPHE warhead bodies, and the smart thing with them that they are dealing more damage to angled armor than armor piercing shells would do. Because if you look at the stats, the armor piercing shell might actually look like it's a good bit better, but in reality the SAPHE heads don't, they can deal more effective damage dependent on the target basically. And SAPHE is best against heavy armor. Good to know. Sandblaster. While it is not sounding very scary, it is a APS weapon damage that uses usually rail or gunpowder or both to shoot a lot of shells extremely quickly. These shells are usually small. Oftentimes they're so small that they can't even be detected and shot down with LAMs. Apparently there are some different opinions on this, but in my book, sandblasters are always only kinetic, usually using a SAPHE head or a heavy head or an armor piercing head. They're called sand because they are so small, usually below kind of 70 millimeter, definitely below 100 millimeter. They usually or sometimes even can't destroy a block they're hitting with one shell, which kind of gets us into the thought of, you know, sandblasting to remove rust and dirt and paint and whatever. So yeah, that's what they're doing, blasting away your enemies with sand and drilling holes and stuff. Spalls. Fragmentations generated from inside the armor when shot with a HESH shell. In real life, other kinetic shells and armor piercing shells can also create spalls, but that's not the thing in From the Depth, so spalls in From the Depth is always from HESH shells shooting at you. The ctrl+o gives us the fantastic and awesome sub-objects menu. So using ctrl+o, you can save your own sub-objects and make a fantastic turret collection. If you happen to be a commissioned officer in the army of Jimidism, however, you can of course download all our turrets and prefabs and use them on your projects too very easily. And if you're not, you're welcome to join, and otherwise you can download our vehicles and save some prefabs and turrets yourself too. And we're getting to the end of the list. Tetris. What is Tetris? Tetris is a smart and efficient pattern to build your weapon systems, engines, lasers. This is a cram Tetris, for example. Anything. It's basically ways and patterns to put blocks into a kind of Tetris pattern to be the most material per second's efficiency, depending on what you're doing, or per volume efficient as you can be. So for example, when we're talking about cram cannons, we have 6 connection Tetris, which is best for material per firepower on your crams, but then there is also 5 connection Tetris, which is better for volume per firepower. And there are different opinions on which is best. And the last entry on our list, the VLMs, vertical launch missiles. Yep, they have been sitting here all along, and that's of course missiles that you can launch vertically from the craft you are on or building. They can be interceptors, they can be damage dealing, but they have to be vertical, VLMs. Oh my god, this text reached from the space down to the bottom of the ocean. If you want this text, check into the description of this video and you should be able to get it there. I just want to say huge thanks to all our commissioned officers in the Army of Jimodesm. Lieutenant Ant-O, Cravey, Powered by Greed, Vincent Veritas, Scoob-Rox, Sig-Hot, and all our cadets, and definitely the Commodore Owen. Thanks a lot for supporting the channel every month, and huge thanks to everyone who is supporting the channel right here under, in the Ecclesiarchy of Jimodesm, which you can join below and get early access to my videos whenever I upload them, instead of when I schedule them. So I definitely hope this video was useful for you, and if it was, I would be very thankful if you left a like. It took some blood, sweat and tears to put together this little list, and feel free to add more entries into the description of this video as well if you think I missed something or have a different opinion or have some new stuff that needs to be added since this video was released and you're watching this 10 years later. Who knows? This is your host Eric of Jimodesm. You should also check out our other channels, but before you do that, I will be saying Eric of Jimodesm, signing out.